Don't underestimate the importance of having a strong brand name. It is crucial to building a successful brand. And actually, history is littered with examples of brands that didn't ever make it due to the poor name choice alone. So why are brand names important? When you're interacting with your customers, you only have a short window, a short amount of time in order to catch them, to get them interested in your brand. And literally you only have a couple of seconds initially. So one of the first impressions someone is going to have with your brand is going to be the brand name. Now it might be through reading it, just when they're scrolling through social media or they're looking at a website. It might be through word of mouth, so it could be through a referral, someone talking about it. Or it might be through an advertising campaign through radio or TV or wherever it is, streaming services. But that first impression is going to stick with them. And if that name doesn't catch them, it doesn't quite feel right, it feels a bit off, you're already off to a bad start. In a lot of cases, the brand name is an afterthought. And you can see that in businesses who get down the line and they realize the brand name's holding them back, and it has been for a long time, and they have to change, they have to rebrand and change everything. So if you can get this right from the beginning, it's really, really important, and it can help to build a successful brand early on and give you longevity with your company. Because if you think of every interaction with your brand as being a compound effect, if you get down the line, you have to rebrand or change your brand name, then all the equity you've built up until that point, without a very well managed rebrand, you're going to have issues, because people are going to, the connections with your brand previously is going to be changed. If you look at an example of the Royal Mail and Consignia, that's kind of what happened there. That all of the emotions, all of the connection with the target audience had with that brand was severed when they changed the brand name and rebranded it with, well, just not done in a very good way. There's actually a video we've got, which I'll put a link to, rebranding failures, and that was one of them that we talked about in that video. We're going to go through 7 of the most common deadly sins when it comes to brand naming for you to watch out for. Number 1, do not creatively spell. So this one might sound obvious, but a lot of people think that adding in random spellings or putting in numbers into brand names is a really good idea to stand out, to be different, and because it sounds kind of cool. But the reality of it is you have to think about your brand name as being something that's going to be used everywhere. So can you imagine being on the phone and trying to explain that to somebody when you have to give out your email address 30 times a day? Can you imagine somebody trying to explain that from a referral perspective to someone and having to spell it in order for them to find your website? These are all issues that happen when you creatively spell and you don't think about how that brand name is going to be used. Because essentially you want a brand name that's easy to remember, that's easy to refer, and that's easy to understand. And if you can create some connection between your brand and the name that makes sense and that's catchy and has a hook, then you've taken it to another level. But if you put creatively spelt names, it's a surefire way to stop people from remembering what your brand is and make it really hard for your audience to refer you to their friends and family. A great example is the Sci-Fi channel. So it used to be Sci-Fi spelled SCI-FI, and that's something that obviously we've had in our culture for a long period of time. There's been lots of shows, even if you go back to the early 50s with kind of your Flash Gordons and things like this, that were some of the earliest sci-fi series. Sci-fi was part of the fabric of our culture. The Sci-Fi channel decided to rebrand and they changed it to SYFY, or Siffy, if you kind of try and say it. And this is one of the problems of creatively spelling brand names. When you go to say them, they sometimes don't sound how you want them to sound. So SYFY is the Sci-Fi channel now, and actually they should have done a bit of due diligence with regards to the brand name, because in Polish it is actually an STD, so that's not a great connotation to have to your TV channel. But essentially, again, if you think about how you've got to try and say that, and every time now after the rebrand they're going to have to say to everybody, if you want to email support, it's support@sci-fi.com, and that's sci-fi spelled SYFY. You have to do that every single time. It's going to get tedious after a while. Number 2, do not copycat. Now it can be tempting to ride on the coattails of larger brands and kind of utilize some of the things that they're doing when it comes to their brand naming. But actually it's one of the worst things you can do, because 1, you're not going to stand out from the competition. In fact, you're actually going to confuse your audience probably if you start to get too close to some brand names, but also it could end up in court. So it's something that you don't want to be doing. It also makes no sense, because the brand name is tied to what the brand is and the identity of that brand and where it's come from and what you're trying to achieve. So by copying a brand name, you're essentially trying to copy an identity, And if you're copying an identity, then you're not distinctive and unique anyway. So it's kind of pointless, even when it comes down to the kind of conventions that companies are using. So if you remember when Apple launched the iPhone and then the iPad, these different things had an I at the beginning, and so many brands at the time would use that to kind of ride on the coattails of Apple, but you knew it wasn't Apple, you knew it wasn't from them, and therefore you kind of got this connotation, this idea of this brand being copying and trying to do that anyway, but also it felt kind of cheap to do that, to just do that, and kind of lazy in a way as well. It kind of almost felt like a lazy way to do something. So try and be unique with whatever you do. Do not copycat. Be distinctive, stand out, have a name that represents who you are, your identity, and what your brand is. Number 3, don't be restrictive. So when you think of the brand name, try not to think about just what you're doing now. The brand name has to be something that's going to grow with your company. It's going to be there in the future, and it's going to represent what your brand is going to become. So therefore, if you actually have a name that limits you to what you're doing now, you'll soon outgrow that. So if you want to think of a brand like this, think of Amazon as an example. Amazon is vast, it can be anything, whereas Poundland really can't. If Poundland want to shift, or they want to pivot, or they want to strategically reposition what they do, there's a difficulty there because they've set their name as something. Now, it worked really well in the beginning, but if they ever need to change that, which they may never need to do, but this is one of the things you have to think about when creating your brand name, is does it have legs? Can it be extended? Is there anything that you can do for that to move it forward in the future? So if it's going to be too restrictive, then do not use that name. It wants to be a name that can carry the brand now, but also in the future. Hit the like button below if you've enjoyed the video so far, and in the comments, put down either a brand name that you absolutely love or a brand name that makes you cringe. Let us know in the comments below. Number 4, don't be annoying. So it can be tempting to create a mysterious, creative, nonsensical name, but actually for your audience, that can be really frustrating and annoying. Remember, this brand name needs to be something that can be referred. It needs to be something that wants to be understood quickly. It needs to be simple, and it wants to be something that allows your brand to grow into it. If it's too creative, if it's too mysterious, if it's too nonsensical, if you're trying to be too clever with it, you can actually end up hindering your growth because nobody will be able to pass on what the name of the brand is. They won't be able to refer it. They won't be able to tell people where to go for a website perspective. You'll lose customers in terms of emails and customer service. It's not a great strategy to have if you want to launch a brand. You want something that is simple, understandable, and that people can there's a stickiness to it. You hear the name like Nike and it sticks. You hear Adidas, it sticks. These brands, they have a way about them of being simple names that you can actually take on board, and you can attach a meaning to them, which is really important. With branding is developing that meaning for what the brand is, and you can do that with certain names. If you get too creative and there's too much in it, you can actually overthink and create a really complex name that nobody can connect with. A great example of this was a children's clothing brand called Species. It was spelt, I can't even remember how it was spelt. It was spelt so strangely, but the logic behind it from the brand itself was they spelt it the way that a child would say it, which is great in theory, but in terms of, again, referring it to your target audience, which isn't going to be the child, it's going to be the parents, referring it to them and other parents, they've got to spell it, and they've got to remember how to spell species without spelling it as you would normally spell species, which is really confusing. You're putting barriers up for people to refer your brand, and you're making it difficult for people to take it on board and for that brand to actually grow. And they went out of business pretty quickly because of it. So remember, if you're going to choose a brand name, it needs to be simple. It needs to be something that people can remember and refer really easily. Number 5, don't be boring. Now, boring is never a great strategy when it comes to branding, but especially in brand names, it's amazing how many companies go down the boring brand name route. So for example, if you think of things like DocuSign, it's so boring. It's something that you don't want to refer to other people. It sounds so studious and so kind of rigid in its approach. It doesn't evoke anything. If you can think of brand names that can evoke something, still simple, still easy to refer, but can evoke something in you, or tell a little bit of a story, or highlight something about the brand itself, then you can actually help your audience to metabolize what your brand is and create that relevancy between the two. A great example of this, as a good example of not being boring, is Dr. Squatch. Now they are a soap brand that is all natural ingredients, they're sustainable, they're eco-friendly, they're a really cool brand, and the way they market is they have a lot of the jester in them, jester archetype, and they use some great adverts to kind of catch you, from a funny kind of Dollar Shave Club vibe perspective to them. And what they do actually with Dr. Squatch is a really interesting one, because the character they have created for the visual identity is Sasquatch. So it's Sasquatch with a pipe, kind of almost Sherlock Holmes looking Sasquatch that is obviously part of this sustainable idea of woodlands and forests, and it comes from North America, so you get that idea of that location tied to the brand. But it's a fun one to say, it's a fun one to refer. You kind of want to refer it. It's a great brand, it's a really good brand, but that's an example of not being boring when it comes to a brand name, as opposed to DocuSign. Number 6, don't use jargon. This comes back to the idea that your audience wants to be able to understand what your brand is, and understand it doesn't have to be explicit, the brand name, in describing what your brand does, but your brand name wants to be something that you can attach meaning to. But if you start adding jargon in that is related to your industry, then you can actually confuse people who don't understand what that jargon means. For you, it might be great, it might be clever, it might be really interesting because you have the level of knowledge in your industry to understand what that jargon means. But what your audience understands about your industry and what you understand about it is vast. It's a vast difference between the two. And what you want to be doing is simplifying that so it's not so complicated, because people will not buy from companies that they feel are overcomplicated, because we just don't want to use too many calories, we don't want to use too much of our thought processes if we can help it to have to decide on a particular thing. For example, if you look at any Gordon Ramsay's Kitchen Nightmares, the first thing he does, he goes in, he looks at the menu where you've got 100 things on the menu, and he strips it all out, and he has 5, 6, 7, potentially 10 items on the menu. And what that is doing is reducing the choice. And if you reduce the choice, you reduce the mental load, it makes it easier for people to make decisions. So if your brand name incorporates lots of jargon, lots of techie speak, you're going to lose your customers so quickly. A great example of this is when you see some of the computers that come out with the names that they have where it's just numbers, the HP 4215 or something like that, as opposed to an Apple iMac. The difference is night and day. One of the reasons why Apple's been so successful is it didn't go down the route of technical jargon. It actually went the other way and said, right, we're going to simplify everything so we can find our audience. And they did that really well. And essentially, just reducing that tech jargon from what they talk about is a really good way for them to connect with that target audience. And it just simplifies everything. Number 7, and we've already gone across this a little bit, but do not make it hard to say. Word of mouth is one of the best ways to get your brand out there and amongst your target audience, and to get it spreading like wildfire. But if people can't say it and they can't refer it, that's never going to happen. So you actually could hinder yourself. You might have an amazing product, amazing service, but if people can't refer your business because the name is too difficult to say, you're actually stopping your brand from growing. A great example of this is Zobni, and I don't even know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but it's inbox backwards. Now that's creative thinking. Did anyone actually think about how that's going to be in terms of referring it for people to say, to understand whether they're pronouncing it right? There's no frame of reference when it comes to that. Is that the right way to say it? Do you have to do a presser or some kind of brand campaign where you got people just saying it over and over again so people understand how to say it? But even if they know how to say it, if someone said that to me on the phone, I wouldn't necessarily know that there is an X at the beginning of it to spell it. So think about your brand names when you're creating them. They need to be easy to say. They need to be easy to spell. They can't be too overly creative in terms of adding in numbers and weird spellings and things like this. They want to be creative in terms of building an iconic, memorable and distinguished brand, but the name itself wants to be something that can be taken on board, can be simple. Doesn't mean it can't be inspirational, can't be evocative. All those things are important, but just be careful about choosing a brand name that's too complicated that will stop you in your tracks. If you're looking to grow a brand, launch a brand or start a new brand, we actually have a course which will take you through the process from start to finish, included naming in that process, to build that core foundation of your brand, to help position, to help talk about messaging, to help create the personality of your brand and the tone of voice. If you're interested, there is a link to that course in the description below. For anybody who has an existing brand who's watching and you want to find out what is strong about your brand, what is weak, and what you can improve, we have a 4-minute assessment, and that is also in the description below that you can take, and it gives you a power score out of 100%. It will score you across 5 different areas of your brand, and it will show you where you can improve and how you can improve. If you've enjoyed this video and you'd like to see more, please subscribe using the button below the video and hit the bell notification so you'll be notified every time a new video drops. Videos come out weekly and they're designed to help you unlock your brand's potential so you can stand out from the competition and create more impact. Have a great week, catch up soon, and keep those brands unified.